At least he knew what he was getting into. First day on the job for a new French Prime Minister, also the long-announced date for a yellow vest-style day of protest against austerity. Sébastien Lecornu taking the handover from predecessor François Bayrou. Bayrou, who passed on the bigger political hot potato, that of a budget that still needs passing. Yes, Lecornu's predecessor undone by an opposition-led parliament, as was Michel Barnier before him. 39-year-old Lecornu, unknown to many, and who's yet been in every government since Emmanuel Macron's second month in office back in 2017. More in a moment on a discreet operator with a reputation of keeping the channels open with everyone, from the socialists to the far right. First, though, we'll take stock of Wednesday's Yellow Vest-inspired Block Everything movement. It started on social media, adopted by the hard left. It's part of the pushback against further cuts to the welfare state in a nation still brooding over pension reform and the scrapping of the wealth tax. More broadly, the disconnect between the elites and the disenfranchised. Will naming a loyalist further stoke resentment against a term-limited Emmanuel Macron? Or can his quiet man succeed where previous heads of government have failed in striking deals with that hostile parliament? Sébastien Lecornu may promise a new approach, but can Macron himself change and resist the temptation to override eventual compromises? Today in the France 24 debate, we're talking about Sébastien Lecornu, the new PM of France. With us, France 24 senior correspondent James Andre, who's been on the move following that day of action. You're currently at, I can see behind you, a rainy Place de la République in Paris.
Absolutely rainy. And just a minute ago, we had a fire that was started here with basically dumpsters being lit by the protesters.
More on how your day has been shortly. Political scientist Damien Lecomte, researcher at Paris Panthéon-Sorbonne University, is with us as well. Thanks for joining us. Agathe Leberder, deputy head of the UGICT CGT Trade Union Confederation. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Emma Kate Simons, contributing editor to the New World and French periodical Franc-Tireur. Good to see you.
You too.
And from Bath in England, Benoît Dillet, senior lecturer in politics, languages, and international studies at the University of Bath. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Welcome.
You can also, by the way, like, subscribe, and listen. That's right, listen to the debate wherever podcasts are streamed. Let's begin with Sébastien Lecornu. He holds the record of longest serving of any of Emmanuel Macron's cabinet members, 8 years, climbing from junior secretary to defense minister. Yet he's the third youngest ever prime minister in French history. So, at 39, is he something old or something new? Charlotte Lamb has more.
Unfazed, Sébastien Lecornu seemingly distanced himself from François Bayrou's downfall. Perhaps deep down he knew he'd be the one to step in, becoming the fifth Prime Minister in just 2 years. At 39, he'd long been tipped for the role. It was in fact in 2019, during the aftermath of the Yellow Vest crisis, that he first caught Emmanuel Macron's eye. To help the president bounce back, Lecornu suggested the Grand Debate, a nationwide consultation inviting citizens to town hall meetings. Coming from the right, he quickly built a reputation as one of Macron's most trusted allies, a status now confirmed in the middle of a political storm. An appearance with the far-right's Marine Le Pen last year made headlines. He also hasn't alienated the socialists, despite roots in the former Conservative Union for a Popular Movement. In 2014, at just 27, Lecornu was elected the mayor of a small town in Normandy.
I'm not really a soldier type. I'm more interested in work that people care about.
3 years later, he broke away from former Prime Minister François Fillon after a political and financial scandal. It was then he threw his support behind Macron. Since 2017, he's been part of every government, most recently as Minister of Armed Forces, defending the defence budget tooth and nail.
Merci de m'accueillir. Avec plaisir.
We can see a smile despite the camouflage.
Le camouflage.
Sébastien Lecornu calls himself a lover of consensus and a fan of impossible missions, words that will soon be put to the test.
So, Damien Lecomte, Is he a technocrat? No, we had on last night a socialist senator who says he's a wily political operator, but he doesn't look like it when you see him in front of the camera, this new prime minister.
He's not very well known of the general public because he has been the minister for armed forces for the last 3 years, and so he has not been in front of the public debate in the last year. So he is not very well known, but he is clearly a political man. I mean, he comes from the right-wing Conservative Party. He's one of the most closest of the closest ministers to Emmanuel Macron. So clearly, he's not just a technocrat. He's a real politician. And now the question that you asked, is he something new or something old? Well, at first sight, it seems like Emmanuel Macron has opted for someone very close to him, and so to continue the policies that he has been defending until then. So will he be able to make much more compromises than his two predecessors is the big question currently.
His two predecessors, both in their 70s, and it was a striking handover this midday we saw at the Prime Minister's office, taking the reins from François Bayrou. We remember last December when Bayrou took over from Michel Barnier, also booted out by Parliament. The pair of them in their 70s, they'd made long legacy speeches. Here, the statements were short and to the point. Lecornu spent far more time shaking hands with fellow ministers and staff than in front of the microphone.
We will also have to change. We will certainly have to be more creative, sometimes more technical, more committed in the way we work with our opponents. But I also say this, there will have to be changes, and not just in terms of presentation, not just in terms of method. There will also have to be changes in substance.
There'll have to be changes in substance. Is that change you can believe in, Emma Kate Simons?
Well, perhaps. It's true, as was mentioned, we don't know too much about the new Prime Minister, but I know that he's being not only compared to being a monk, but as La Croix, the Catholic newspaper, reported, he actually dreamed of religious life when he was younger. Macron apparently likes the fact that he's like a tomb. So perhaps Macron is hoping these monk-like and tomb-like qualities may help in doing some kind of deal that will not entirely alienate the far right and the hard right and the centre right, because that seems to be where Macron is directing his attention. And I would notice today that Jordan Bardella from Marine Le Pen's National Rally has not said that his party will immediately censure the government, which has been pretty much the message from the far left and from some on the more moderate left. I hear Marine Tondelier not ruling it out quite soon.
Leader of the Greens.
Yes, leader of the Greens.
Agathe Le Berdet, he began the day before that ceremony by making phone calls, including to trade union leaders. What does that tell you?
Well, to us, like, the change of casting doesn't really matter. What matters is really what they're going to apply and what public policies they're going to try to push forward. And the risk is, it was good that you reminded in the introduction that the same scenario happened to Michel Barnier, but also Gabriel Attal. If you try to force antisocial policies upon the people, you end up actually being forced to quit, which is what happened to François Bayrou, because the budget that he proposed was very unfair. 40 billions of euros of cuts in public spending that the workers would entirely support on themselves. That was very unfair. And we had told Emmanuel Macron after the social movement in 2023 that as he tried to force this pension reform in such an anti-democratic way, he was opening a democratic crisis in our country. And here we are in a democratic crisis that has not been ending since 2023. So the first thing they have to say is that they want to backtrack on the pension reform that they have been applying since 2023, which he hasn't done. This morning, he hasn't spoke about the budget. He hasn't spoke about this pension reform. There needs to be strong statements about public policies right now.
All right, but he did promise change. Again, he's got the pressure from Parliament, pressure from the unions, and James Andre, pressure from the street to a degree. Tell us about it.
Yes, absolutely. You can probably see this fire behind me that's been revived with yet another dustbin that is being burnt here on the Place de la République. Now, in all fairness, it's been a pretty calm day in all here in Paris. There were, several hundred at some stage, probably a couple of thousand protesters here on the Place de la République. We, with my colleague Julie Dunkelhoff, we started early this morning from France 24, drove along the Boulevard Périphérique, which is, the iconic ring road around Paris that, protesters promised they would be blocking. Well, that actually didn't really happen this morning. And then we moved on to a high school, and there we were able to speak to some high school students who decided to block their school. They'd put some dustbins in front of the doors. They were, chanting slogans. Also, there was a protest coming from the eastern suburbs of Paris that was stopped by police. There was a little bit of tension there, but things quickly subsided. We've been seeing this all over Paris, flashes of protest quickly being quelled, and then it was Gare du Nord, where there was a pretty important sit-in, but some of the protests were trying to invade and enter into that railway station, but at no moment was the railway station, overrun. Of course, this is an important railway station in Paris because you have, of course, lines to the UK, to Belgium, to Germany. And then, we came here where at one stage a lot of the protesters were concentrating their forces. A lot were coming also from another part of central Paris, which is Les Halles, where the police decided to stop and close all the shops.
While you're talking, by the way, while you're talking,
James, advancing.
Yeah,
look, you can probably see it.
Well, we're seeing it as well, James, because we're getting a feed from a different angle at another end of the square, showing people who were throwing bicycles and garbage cans onto that fire.
Exactly, but as you can see, this is really the end of this protest. These are the last protesters, I'd say, probably the most radical that are still here. But, in all, around 250,000 people came out today, between 175, 250,000. Those are the official figures across France. In Paris, it was a few thousand. Of course, there was some disruption, but none of what you could imagine as being, widespread blockage of the whole of the capital for today.
All right, and we see those riot police moving in and dispersing those people around that fire behind you there, James Andre.
Yeah, absolutely. We're gonna go mobile if you don't mind.
Sure.
What we're gonna do is just.
Why don't you?
Don't worry, we can just. We've been speaking to quite a few. Look, we've been speaking to quite a few of the protesters today, and it's very much a mixed bag. Some talk about the economy, others are rather about Gaza, very much about Gaza and the situation there. And then, yes, of course, people are calling for Macron to resign. But in effect, no one able to tell us what exact measures they were against and what they wanted to see change immediately. A lot of people disappointed with the choice of Sébastien Lecornu as the new prime minister, saying that it is more of the same and that their message was not being heard. I'll leave you now because it's getting complicated here.
All right, stay away from that tear gas. Many thanks, James Andre, for that live update from Paris's Place de la République. Sébastien Lecornu, as James was saying, sworn in at midday, but already protesters had time to hold up a sick and tired of Lecornu sign, like we could show you, for instance, in the southern city of Montpellier, where that happened. At the Gare du Nord train station in Paris, you heard the allusion that James made to it earlier. Commuters and Eurostar travelers got a whiff of the political mood with a morning dose of tear gas as they arrived to catch their trains, while in nearby streets, neither police nor protesters shied away from some argy-bargies you saw there. Spectacular pictures, but it wasn't the kind of mobilization nationwide that many had expected. There was a big police presence across the country, nearly 500 people taken who were arrested, detained, if you will. Let me ask you, because Benoît Tillet, there's the politics and there's the optics of the politics. This handover ceremony on the posh left bank of Paris, and these pictures that ran all day on the French all-day news channels. How's France being seen here, and how's France being seen where you are across the channel?
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I'm an academic, so I like to take a longer view really of things. And I think at the moment we are in a sequence where we are preparing for the presidential election of 2027. And I think the decision by Macron to dissolve the National Assembly, to call for early elections in June 2024 was his biggest mistake. It completely blew in his face, and he got a parliament that basically cannot do very much with. So some people are calling for early elections, whether that's going to resolve it or not. The problem is now that we have the disunion between the legislative, the parliamentary elections and the presidential elections makes it really quite tricky for Macron to do anything. So I think we've got a crisis which is institutional, which is to do with the long term of the Fifth Republic, but it's also to do with the current hung parliament that we have in France, as well as an economic situation, which is largely produced by Macron himself. We saw a huge drop of the stock market, of the debt of France after the call of the early election in June 2024. And we also see, if you want, a kind of reconfiguration of the party politics as well, with a demonization of the left by the increasingly extreme kind of centrist position, yeah.
And this day of protest, which had long been planned, leaderless, so therefore some compared it to the Yellow Vests. Is that a fair comparison, or is it very different?
It's, I think, just like the previous presenter was explaining, I think it's also building from the 2023 protest, the pension reform, which we saw also adopting some of the strategies of the Yellow Vest movement, which means that it's not simply concentrated in Paris, where generally traditional demonstrations take place, but it's a lot more horizontal, it's a lot more throughout the country, in also more provincial towns. This is very different from the Yellow Vest movement, however, because this is really driven by the radical left. So the numbers, 250,000, is actually really high because it's quite a radical left movement. It has not really to do with those kind of big protests where you see millions of people in the streets against other policies. So this is really a show of strength from the left on a Wednesday, not even on a Saturday or on a Sunday, right? So it's also much harder to come out on a working day in support of this new protest. So let's see, obviously, what will happen in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, well, it's in large part citizens who rarely even vote who led that leaderless Yellow Vests movement that began in October of 2018. Many of the protests this Wednesday taking on a more traditional left versus right kind of vibe, as seen outside this Amazon warehouse factory in the southern Paris suburb of Bretigny-sur-Orge.
The left won the political election, the last legislative elections, and the president didn't appoint a minister from the ranks of the left.
This is unprecedented.
Unprecedented, exactly. It's a total denial of democracy. We've never seen this in France. So in fact, when he appoints a new Prime Minister, Lecornu, who comes from his own ranks, what can we hope for? That's why we're blocking it.
I got Liberté. It's interesting that clip of those two people outside the factory, because they're not calling for revolution. They're
calling
more
for what they voted for last year.
So this is very different from the Yellow Vests.
I think it's it's similar in the way that we speak about social issues. We speak about taxes, about fiscal justice. We speak about wages, about how wages have not increased enough in the last few years because of inflation. We speak about labor conditions. François Bayrou asked people to work 2 days more for free. Like, what did they expect as a reaction from people in the summer? The entire unions in France told them, do not do that. Your budget is violent, it's antisocial. You need to shift your policies. You need to backtrack on the pension system reform. You need to tax the richest. We have the Zuckman tax that was discussed in the parliament.
Explain what the Zuckman tax is.
So the Zuckman tax basically is about taxing the richest people in this country, which are like 0.1% of richest people in this country in order to have 20 billion euros more that we can spend on our hospitals, on our schools, maybe on benefits for the poorest. So this is what
that won't solve alone the debt problem. And
Absolutely.
so France, with close to 114% of GDP, has a genuine debt crisis on its hands, and François Bayrou did, to his credit, try to talk to the people about this. But I would say that what exactly the unions are talking about, real bread and butter issues, wages, working conditions, pensions, but from the actual leader of the current movement of Block Everything, because it actually came out of the far-right sovereignist movements who were very yellow vestish in some respects over the summer, who were retweeting Elon Musk, who were anti-vax and conspiracist.
It's not what we saw on the streets today.
No, it's not, but the far left have, as Benoit pointed out, come in and opportunistically, the extreme left, including the extreme left, hopped onto this protest movement, as Jean-Luc Mélenchon announced in July, and that they are putting their own much more radical twist on it than what most of the unions are doing, which is proposing a different protest on the 18th of September. And so I don't think Jean-Luc Mélenchon, I think that a lot of this is a manufactured crisis, manufactured online, and it's particularly manufactured and pushed by La France Insoumise and people in that more radical orbit. And we can see today that's why not so many people came out as expected, because this is exactly the kind of thing the far right wants. They want to see this kind of burning of bins, burning of buildings, black bloc people coming out, far left anti-fascist demonstrations to discredit the genuine concerns of the majority of French people and frankly of a lot of unions.
So I get, Le Berdet, when you answer the question, just to remind our viewers, there's today and there's a week from Thursday, and that's when the traditional trade unions have all called for a strike action.
Absolutely, in order to have fiscal justice.
So is this manufactured, what we saw today?
I don't think so, because what happened today, and this is also the success of the day, is that strikes were actually pretty big in firms, and honestly, we weren't expecting that. At the SNCF, which is the train system in France, public train system, 25% of workers were on strike. We have strikes also in the industry sector. At Owens, Illinois, for example, people are striking against the closure of a part of their industry. There are strikes also in the energetic field since last week. There's a lot of anger everywhere in this country, and most of it also comes from wage issues. In the electric industry, it's all about wages. At the SNCF, it's the same thing, because none of the governments, the last governments, have made anything about our wages, and the extreme right has been voting against measures that would improve our wages. They voted against minimum wage, against indexing our wages on inflation. So it's good that we put social issues back in the center of the debate.
Do you agree with the concept of sharing the pain all around?
About the debt, I mean, François Bayrou hasn't been talking about the 6,000 euros we spent each second in order to fund businesses in this country. This is like the elephant in the middle of the room.
France has huge public spending, has a fantastic health and education system,
and
that's
budget.
excellent, but it spends
funding.
much more than most other Western countries.
The first budget in our state, our taxes are actually financing businesses without asking them, without control, without conditions. We have no idea what they do with this money. Nobody asks for the receipt of, did you create jobs? Did you actually increase wages? Did you reduce working time?
But you can't force businesses to increase wages. You have to create the conditions that allow them to do so.
If you give them public money,
and also, we're not talking about the geopolitical situation. I mean, today, Russia overnight sent drones into Poland. So Europe is being attacked, and Jean-Luc Mélenchon is attacking Ukraine, and no one's talking about that.
Let me ask Damien Lecomte about what a majority of the French want, because obviously burning garbage cans gets eyeballs on television and images of cops and demonstrators fighting. But what do a majority of the French want in regards to this big budget battle and the deficit? What do polls suggest?
Something that was interesting with the two people who talked was that there is a real anger and distrust towards the political system, because in last year's election, in the SNAP election, the Macronist coalition lost a big deal in this election. And so there is this feeling that their votes did not matter. So it is hard to say what a majority won, because obviously the country is very divided. But it is clear that this government is very unpopular, and the austerity budget defended by François Bayrou is very unpopular, and there is clearly a will in. There is, I think, a majority of French people who wants to indeed more social justice and more fiscal justice. And one of the problem we have to reach compromises within this National Assembly is that since the beginning, Emmanuel Macron and all the centrist coalition wants to protect at all costs Macron's legacy and especially his fiscal policy in favor of the richest, the big corporations. And so clearly the French people want that the rich pay their share of the efforts.
All right, and we heard that clip of Sébastien Lecornu, short speech, plays his cards close to his chest, saying we're going to have to change, we're going to have to change our method, we're going to have to change perhaps some of our policies. Is compromise possible?
I think compromise is theoretically possible, but indeed what has been said is that Emmanuel Macron has tasked Sébastien Lecornu with consulting the political forces within Parliament. But the big question is, what are the substantial concessions that Sébastien Lecornu and the President Macron are willing to make? Because François Bayrou was presented as a mediator, as a negotiator himself, and he tried to discuss with the left wing, at least with the socialists and the Greens and the communists, not the radical left, but he hardly made any concessions to them. And even if the socialists...
And is the problem Bayrou or is the problem Emmanuel Macron, who scrapped the wealth tax and who doesn't want to go back on pension reform?
I think that both of them did not want to go back on most of their reforms, and so the socialists had opted to not vote motions of no confidence against François Bayrou first budget for 2025 year, but he hardly made any real concessions to them, and he did not respect most of the concessions he made, especially on the pension reform, because he promised to reopen the debate. And so now I think the left wing is very suspicious towards Sébastien Lecornu, because they tried to negotiate with François Bayrou. It did not pay off for them, and so now I think if he wants to reach compromises, he needs to make substantial concessions to convince.
All right, Benoît Dillet, you have Emmanuel Macron, since that failed dissolution, who appointed two prime ministers who were not on paper from his political party. Michel Barnier, known to people where you are as the Brexit negotiator, he's from the conservative Les Républicains party. François Bayrou has been in coalition with Macron but has his own centrist political party as well. Here, with the choice of Sébastien Lecornu, he has someone who's from his party and who's an insider. Does that mean that Macron will be micromanaging what happens next?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it really shows that he's not listening, that he's just continuing to be Macron, really. And the fact that there is really now, it's a crisis of Macronism. We're kind of living at the moment simply the dusk of Macronism in a way. It's going to last another 18 months, almost 2 years. And the real question is whether there will be a real crisis of the Fifth Republic institutions and perhaps the new, the desire for a new constitution.
Is it an avoidable crisis? Is it an avoidable crisis? Can a compromise be reached on a budget?
The problem is not the budget. The problem is, the problem of the budget is created by a huge increase in military spending, huge increase in the fact that now the interest rates has gone up due to the crisis I was talking about in June 2024, and the fact also that under Macron, a huge increase in subsidy to companies, about 200 billion euros a year go to private companies. And this is basically the policy of Macron. It's not working because France is in debt. So therefore, there are lots of new ideas on the left, and it's really the turn of the left to have a possibility of governing. I think this is what a lot has been said over the last few years. So it's not a manufactured crisis, not at all. Macron is deeply unpopular in all parts of political spectrum. It's not just the left. It's not just social media personalities trying to create something. No, there's no conspiracy here. Everyone is really against Macron and how he's been
unpopular, but he was re-elected.
How elitist. he's very privileged, he's very elitist, and he just doesn't listen. You know,
he's unpopular, but you're saying he's unpopular and the polls show it, but he was re-elected nonetheless.
He was very badly re-elected. When you look at the numbers, less than 20% of the voters voted for him. So that's a very, very small mandate in real terms because of the abstention, obviously, that we need to take into consideration.
Right, but that's exactly the rhetoric delegitimizing, I'm sorry to say, the election of Emmanuel Macron, which comes all the time out of the far left and the far right. And it's interesting that you point out, Benoit, about the increase in defence spending on the day that Vladimir Putin ordered drone strikes on Poland, part of the European Union, as an extension of his war on Ukraine, a war that is basically opposed by Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who says that the borders can go back to Soviet times, and who also accused Vladimir Zelensky of being president of nothing. Now, this is the man who, if you look, and we talk about manufactured crisis, look at the social media of La France Insoumise and Jean-Luc Mélenchon today and yesterday. He attacked Sébastien Lecornu for giving money to NATO and for upping the defence budget as you did. Well, this is France, I'm sorry, being up in the air and not being aware of what's going on in the world. I mean, Europe is under attack. France has a debt crisis on its hands.
Yeah,
it cannot only just be about Macron being elitist, which is also the language of conspiracy theorists, which we talk about on Conspiracy Watch.
I think France is also in connection to other parts of Europe. For example, French people now know that the minimum wage in Germany is higher than ours, that the minimum wage in Spain has been rising by 60% for the last years, which is not the case in France. We've been having wages that are not increasing enough to follow up in the inflation, especially for professionals, technicians, managers that have had their wages really flatten in the last few years. What for? For firms to actually keep their profits to themselves and not share it. I really want to come back to the initial crisis. Macron was badly elected. Okay. Then he put up his reform, the 2023 reform. It actually started in 2022. Then the union gathered to say, no, this is not going to be possible. 9 out of 10 workers were saying, no, we do not want to be forced to work 2 years more. There were millions of people in the street for a month, hundreds of thousands of people on strike. And then what happened? They used all of the most anti-democratic tools we have in the Constitution to force it upon us. And ever since...
Well, the Constitution is democratic. I mean, you might not like the tool, but it's still part of the French democracy.
By forcing a vote upon people that is opposed by that many workers, you are using anti-democratic tools. Then François Bayrou said, okay, I'll reopen the debate. He opened the debate. The CGT participated in the consultation. And then what did he say? Oh, I'm actually closing it. There is no coming back to 62 years old.
I want to emphasize something. It is true that Emmanuel Macron was re-elected, but he was re-elected also in a Republican front against the far-right candidate Marine Le Pen. And the result of the snap election in 2024 was also a victory of the Republican front against the National Rally of the far-right. But this time it was the left-wing alliance who was in majority inside within this Republican front. And so it is, I think, disappointing for, especially for left-wing voters to see that they helped Macron win against the far-right, but when the Republican front wins because of the left-wing alliance, President Macron doesn't try to reach compromises with these new popular front who won most seats in the National Assembly.
Could Emmanuel Macron bend on that specific issue, this 2% so-called Zuckman tax on the very wealthiest? Do you see him bending on that?
Potentially. I mean, it's hard to look inside his brain. I mean, it's only been today that the new Prime Minister has been sworn in. But I think that on the pension reform, this is something he was actually elected on. He went to the people with it. He won the election. To say that he was badly elected, this is edging towards Trumpian rhetoric, frankly. And that this is exactly the kind of overthrow Macron rhetoric we're seeing online. And it's coming. It's being pushed externally by the Elon Musks, by the Nigel Farages, by Alexander Dugin, the brain of Putin, who are rejoicing in the so-called chaos in France today and who want Macron to be overthrown. If you took what Alexander Dugin said, it sounds exactly like Jean-Luc Mélenchon.
I agree that the extreme right is the worst dangers for workers. That's what we've been saying at the CGT for the last 130 years. But about public spendings and how we can find resources in order to fund our schools, fund our hospitals, fund our pensions. We have been giving a lot of options to Emmanuel Macron. None of them he kept. For example, for the pension system, we proposed to François Bayrou to have a sanction on firms who do not apply gender equality. This would represent 6 billion euros per year for our pensions. They said no. This is not a way to govern a country where you have to listen to workers and their representatives.
All right, while the hard left cheers on the block everything movement that we saw this Wednesday, the far right in the last days and weeks has eased off its demand that Emmanuel Macron immediately resign. They're even suggesting they won't systematically block a new budget.
We've always stated, and most notably for the budgets, what are our electors' aspirations and which we will defend. So our state of mind has never been to automatically vote to censure the government, but it should be said that the prime ministers who come and go all look alike and don't seem to draw the conclusions from their predecessors' failures. That's a bit of a problem.
Se suivent et se ressemblent et ne semblent pas tirer les leçons des échecs de leurs prédécesseurs, ce qui pose une certaine difficulté.
Benoît Dillet, is Marine Le Pen saying she's ready to horse trade over this budget? That's the urgent matter to hand, passing a budget for 2026.
So there was a tacit alliance between Barnier and Le Pen. The fact that she would not censor the government. She's playing on a very tight role. Basically, it's really difficult for her in a way because at the same time she's really part of the system. I mean, the Le Pen have been a dynasty, have been part of the system for decades, and they really know well the institutions. But at the same time, she also tries to appear as an outsider. So sometimes she wants to censor, sometimes she says she's against, but most of the time, actually, she kind of agrees with the right-wing proposal of neoliberal policies. Because when you look very closely, which this political party, the National Rally, do not want you to look very closely at the economic policies. What they propose is austerity and neoliberal policies, which is not so different from Macron, actually. But of course, they pretend to be, coming from a different side, and that they want to give some easy answers, but that's just in the rhetoric. When you actually look, what they want to do is really a lot of tax break for companies and more of the same. The magic recipe is really trying to remove immigration, try to deport immigrants, and that will solve all the problems. I mean, that's basically a lot of the answers to a lot of the politics from Marine Le Pen. So here, I think the big thing is the fact she's weakened. She's risking at the moment 5 years in prison and 5-year political ban. We will know about this when she appeals. The appeal will be early next year. So at the moment, they're very much weakened. They're trying to stay in line for the presidential in 2027, but they don't even sure about what leadership they will be under. So they're also in crisis completely.
Agathe Liberté, both businesses and employees want to see a budget for 2026. Because right now, one of the things that they are the most worried about is the lack of clarity going forward.
Lack of clarity and lack of social policies. I mean, right now there are a lot of emergencies going on. Our hospitals, our education system, the fact that inequalities are surging, and we need to have answers that
Do you recognize that the deficit is also a problem?
Yeah, but public spendings on business funding is also a major issue. He told our colleague just spoke about it. It's 200 billion euros per year. It represents 6,000 euros per second.
But the biggest is the pension budget. The Social Security is the biggest budget item.
Because
that's weighing on the deficit, and so therefore by lowering again the pension age, there'll be even less money and more debt.
It's our contributions. As long
but
as
the population is
working,
aging, there's a whole series of demographic challenges, and people actually don't necessarily want to all of them stop working in certain.
Nobody's forbidding people to work more.
In certain industries, actually, people want more work. They want to be able to work longer under different conditions, and the question is, will the work even exist? So the whole debate is a little bit à côté de la plaque, like they say in French. It's like not even
why do they want to make us work more if there's no jobs?
No,
That's
it's not
exactly,
work more.
You're
It's to
pinning
be
the right issue.
it's to work like when we're still people live longer, they're healthier. In France, they live among the longest in the world.
Nobody forbids anybody to work as long as they want. But we want people to be able. This is what happened in France in 2023. The government decided to forbid people who are 62 and 63 to retire when they could actually do it.
You realize people watching this show in the rest of Europe, most of them retire at 67.
I understand, because it's usually their choice. In France, you cannot, if you want in another country, you can retire before. Your pension will be lower. In France, you cannot retire today at 63. This
a lot
is
of people
wrong.
retire
A lot of
earlier
senior
than that,
workers
actually.
right now are unable to work. Half of them, approximately, are unable to work. They're either unemployed and have way less wages than they used to have when they worked, or they're sick, too sick to work. And this situation is worsening day after day, so we need a solution. Emmanuel Macron and his prime minister have to put a strong statement about the pension reform, because this is what has been going wrong for 2 years. It's the democratic crisis
there was,
we're facing.
and Damien mentioned it, the brinkmanship of François Bayrou, adding the 2 days of holiday that would be scrapped. But then he said in the next breath, oh, I can get rid of that at the negotiating table. There's not much time for brinkmanship. If you want to get a budget passed fast, but for 2026, there's going to have to be compromise. Do you think it's possible?
I mean, it is possible if we open the discussion on the business fundings. These 200 billion euros spent every year for firms without any control. We need to open this debate.
And you're right that on the public holidays, I saw that the business peak body, the MEDEF, said, well, you can't abolish public holidays, make people work and not pay them. So that's fair enough. There's obviously room for manoeuvre around this. But on the question of trying to tackle the deficit and pass a budget, yes, the polls show that the French people want the budget passed. They're frustrated. And that's why I think the political parties are treading, some of them, carefully to not censure this new government immediately, because to constantly overthrow prime ministers and governments is not what the French people want, according to the polls.
Something that's been talked about in this studio over the last 2 weeks is the fact that François Bayrou's legacy will nonetheless, with this statement he made about the pensions right now, everything being done for, quote, the comfort of boomers.
That's a shame.
It has opened a debate over whether or not this is a left versus right issue that we're going to see more and more in France and in Europe, or an intergenerational issue.
François Bayrou tried to frame the issues in this way, but I don't think it's really the real political division right now. I think that the social issues and the right-wing divide is still the more important right now in the public debate. And to answer your question, is compromises possible? I think that most of the responsibility is currently on Sébastien Lecornu, because I really think that of all the political blocs in the National Assembly, the governing coalition has been, for now, the least willing to make substantial compromises with the others.
And it's interesting that the great debate was what sealed his alliance. He'd already been a minister, but it's what sealed his alliance with Emmanuel Macron. Just to remind our viewers, the great debate was this after the Yellow Vest movement had begun, basically organizing town hall style meetings across the country, which proved very popular.
It's true. Maybe Sébastien Lecornu will prove to be able to make the compromises that neither Michel Barnier, neither François Bayrou was willing to make. Maybe he will be able to reiterate this grand debate and to reach compromises, but he really needs to make substantial concessions that this predecessor have not made.
Benoît Tillet, I asked you a question earlier, but you haven't yet answered it. How are things looking in France, seen from the other side of the channel right now?
I cannot speak for all the people in the UK, really, and I follow, I think, all the French media. I think there's I wouldn't be able to say. I think it's quite specific. It seems like it's quite the instability is very specific to France. I mean, there's obviously the cliche that France is always having a protest, which and you talked about it, how TV really likes to capture that, and it really it's a way of portraying France in a particular way. So I don't think that's the reality. I think it's much more interesting what we are seeing right now. This sequence that I was talking about, and the fact that in the next 2 years, what would really happen with the fall of Macron and what will come next, really.
All right, we're into that beginning of that lame duck period, but there's again a lot still pressing. Emma Kate Simons, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank as well for coming on Agathe Leberdet, Damien Lecomte, Benoît Dillet for joining us from Bath in England. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.